Detective John Kincaid stares at the piece of paper in his trembling hands, his own name written in faded ink at the bottom of a list titled Unsolved Victims. The retirement party from just hours ago feels like a lifetime away now, the echoes of congratulations and well-deserved rest ringing hollow in his mind as he realizes his peaceful golden years might be nothing more than a dangerous illusion. But let's start from the beginning, because what happened next shocked everyone who knew this decorated cop. Just 12 hours earlier, the Riverside Police Department's main conference room buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses. Captain Rodriguez raises his beer high, grinning at the man of the hour. 32 years of service, folks. 32 years of John Kincaid putting the bad guys behind bars and making our streets safer. The room erupts in applause. John shifts uncomfortably in his chair, never one for the spotlight. His weathered face breaks into a modest smile as he looks around at his colleagues. Some he's trained, others he's learned from, all of them family in their own way. Speech! Speech! Someone calls out from the back. John stands slowly, his knee giving him that familiar twinge that reminds him why retirement isn't such a bad idea. You all know I'm not much for talking, he begins, his gravelly voice carrying the weight of 3 decades on the force. But I will say this: every case we closed, every family we helped find closure, every night I came home safe to Emily, that was because of this team, this family. Detective Sarah Lee, his partner for the past 8 years, wipes away a tear she doesn't want anyone to see. She's watched John work miracles with cold cases, seen him talk desperate people off ledges, witnessed his unwavering dedication to justice. The department won't be the same without him. Now don't get all sentimental on me, Lee. John chuckles, catching her emotional moment. Someone's got to keep these rookies in line. The party continues well into the evening, but John finds himself thinking about all the cases that still haunt him. The ones that got away. The families still waiting for answers. Little did John know that his own family would soon need those answers more than anyone. Later that night, John sits in his home office, surrounded by boxes of case files he's been meaning to organize. Emily had suggested he throw them away. You're retired now, honey. Let someone else carry that weight. But John can't let go. Not yet. He picks up a file marked Riverside Strangler, 1998, and flips through the crime scene photos. 3 victims, all found within a 2-mile radius of downtown. The case went cold when their primary suspect, Richard Gillespie, disappeared without a trace. Presumed dead, the file was eventually archived. As John sorts through more files, his fingers brush against a manila envelope wedged between 2 thick case folders. Strange, he doesn't remember this one. The envelope is unmarked, sealed, and feels heavier than it should. Inside, John finds a single sheet of paper with a typewritten list. The heading makes his blood run cold. Unsolved Victims. Below it, for names he recognizes from various cases throughout his career. Victims whose killers were never caught. Cases that kept him awake at night. But the real shock was still coming. At the bottom of the list, in different handwriting, his own handwriting, is a 5th name. John Kincaid. John's hands shake as he stares at the paper. When did he write his own name on this list? Why would he do such a thing? The handwriting is definitely his, but he has no memory of creating this document. The date at the top reads 3 months ago, right around the time he started having those strange dreams about being watched. He thinks about the odd phone calls with no one on the other end, the feeling of being followed after leaving the precinct, the car that seemed to park outside his house a little too often. Emily had dismissed his concerns as pre-retirement jitters, but now, this decision would change everything. John reaches for his phone with trembling fingers, scrolling through his contacts until he finds Sarah's number. She's probably still celebrating at Murphy's bar with the rest of the crew. But this can't wait. As the phone rings, John studies the list again, trying to remember anything: a case, a threat, a moment when someone might have promised revenge. Kincaid? Jesus, don't tell me you're already missing us. Sarah's voice comes through the speaker, slightly slurred but alert enough to catch the tension in his breathing. Sarah, I need you to come over. Now, And don't tell anyone where you're going. The line goes quiet except for the background noise of the bar fading as Sarah moves somewhere private. John, what's wrong? You sound scared. John finishes for her. Yeah, that's because I might be next on someone's hit list, and I have no idea who put me there. John's hands tremble as he reaches for his phone, the list with his name still burning in his vision. The clock on his mantel reads 11:47 p.m., but this can't wait until morning. He dials Sarah's number, each ring feeling like an eternity. Kincaid? Do you know what time it is? Detective Sarah Lee's voice carries that familiar mix of annoyance and concern that's defined their partnership for 12 years. Sarah, I need you to listen to me. Something's not right. John keeps his voice low, not wanting to wake Emily upstairs. I found a list tonight going through my old files. It has victims' names on it, people from unsolved cases. John, you're retired. Remember? We had the party and everything. Sarah's tone softens slightly, but John can hear her sitting up in bed. My name is on the list, Sarah. At the bottom. The silence stretches between them before Sarah exhales slowly. Where did you find this list? Mixed in with the Patterson case files. You remember Patterson? That warehouse shooting from 5 years ago? We never caught the perp. Never even had a solid lead. John runs his hand through his graying hair, the weight of unfinished business pressing down on him. I remember. 3 victims. No witnesses. Killer vanished like smoke. Sarah pauses, and John can practically hear her detective instincts kicking in. But John, think about this logically. Why would someone put your name on a victim list and then leave it where you'd find it? John stares at the papers scattered across his coffee table. Maybe they wanted me to find it. Maybe this is some kind of game. The words taste bitter in his mouth, but they feel true. I'm coming over, Sarah says, and John hears her car keys jingling. Don't touch anything else until I get there. 20 minutes later, Sarah stands in John's living room, latex gloves on her hands as she examines the mysterious list. Her dark hair is pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she's wearing the same skeptical expression she always gets when a case doesn't add up. The handwriting looks familiar, she murmurs, holding the paper up to the light. Almost like. She trails off, her eyes widening. What is it? John moves closer, but Sarah pulls the paper away from him. John, we need to go to the precinct. Tonight. Her voice has taken on that urgent edge that means she's found something significant. We need to check your old case files, especially anything from the Patterson investigation. The drive to the station passes in tense silence. The building feels different at night, shadows seem longer. Familiar hallways look foreign under the emergency lighting. John's keycard still works, and they make their way to the cold case storage room. Here, Sarah says, pulling out a thick manila folder labeled Patterson. Michael, July 2019. Everything we had on the warehouse shooting. They spread the contents across a nearby desk, crime scene photos, witness statements, autopsy reports. John's own handwritten notes fill the margins. His thoughts and theories from years ago looking back at him like ghosts. Sarah picks up one of John's evidence logs, comparing the handwriting to the victim list. The color drains from her face as she holds them side by side under the fluorescent light. John, she whispers, her voice barely audible. This handwriting on the list. It matches your notes perfectly. John snatches the papers from her hands, his eyes darting between the 2 documents. The careful loops of the G's, the way the T's are crossed, the distinctive slant of the letters. It's unmistakably his own writing. That's impossible, he breathes. I didn't write that list. I've never seen it before tonight. But even as he says the words, doubt creeps into his voice. The evidence is right there in front of him, undeniable. Sarah studies his face carefully, her detective training warring with 12 years of partnership and trust. John, I need you to think carefully. Is there any chance you wrote that list and forgot about it? Maybe during the stress of one of your cases. No. John's voice is firm, but his hands are shaking. I would remember writing my own name on a victim list. He stares at the papers again, a cold realization settling in his stomach. Unless what? Sarah leans forward, her eyes searching his face. John's voice drops to barely above a whisper. Unless someone else knows my handwriting well enough to forge it perfectly. The phone call with Sarah still echoed in John's mind as he sat in his study, staring at the handwritten list that bore his name. The familiar curves and loops of his own penmanship mocked him from the yellowed paper. How could he have written his own name on a victim list? The question gnawed at him like a persistent ache. John. Emily's voice drifted from the kitchen, followed by the soft padding of her slippers on hardwood. It's past midnight. Are you coming to bed? He quickly slid the list under a stack of case files, his heart racing with guilt. After 32 years of marriage, Emily could read him like an open book, and the last thing he wanted was to burden her with this nightmare. Just finishing up some paperwork, he called back, forcing lightness into his voice. I'll be up in a few minutes. Emily appeared in the doorway, her silver hair catching the lamplight. She wore the blue robe he'd bought her for Christmas, the one she claimed made her feel like a movie star. Even at 65, she still took his breath away. Paperwork. She stepped closer, concern creasing her features. John, you retired 3 days ago. What paperwork could you possibly have? He stood, moving to block her view of the desk. Just organizing old files. You know how I hate leaving loose ends. That's what I'm afraid of, she said softly, reaching out to touch his cheek. You've been different since the party. Distant. Something's bothering you, and don't try to tell me it's just retirement jitters. The tenderness in her voice nearly broke his resolve. Emily had stood by him through every late night, every dangerous case, every time he'd chosen duty over dinner. She deserved the truth, but how could he tell her that someone might want him dead? It's nothing I can't handle, he said, covering her hand with his. Just some old ghosts that need putting to rest. She searched his eyes, and he saw the exact moment she decided not to push. It was vintage Emily, giving him space while making it clear she was there when he needed her. But before she could respond, her attention was caught by something glinting in the corner of his desk. What's this? She moved toward the case files, and John's stomach dropped as she pulled out a photograph. One he'd forgotten was there. It was from his last case, the one that had haunted him into retirement. The victim, Maria Santos, smiled from her high school yearbook photo. Young, innocent, full of dreams that would never be realized. John, Emily whispered, studying the photo. Isn't this the girl from the news? The one they never found the killer for. The weight of failure pressed down on him like a physical force. Maria Santos had been 23, a graduate student working late at the university library. She'd been found 3 weeks later in an abandoned warehouse, and despite John's best efforts, her killer had vanished like smoke. Yeah, he said quietly. That's her. But why do you still have her file? The case was closed, wasn't it? Not closed. Cold. The distinction mattered to him even now. There's a difference. Emily set the photograph down gently, as if it were made of glass. Is this why you've been so troubled? Because of her. Before John could answer, Sarah's voice rang out from the living room. John, your front door was unlocked. I brought coffee and something you need to see. Emily raised an eyebrow as they walked to meet Sarah, who was spreading documents across their coffee table. The detective looked like she hadn't slept, her usually pristine uniform wrinkled and her dark hair escaping its ponytail. Sarah, what are you doing here at this hour? Emily asked, but her tone was more curious than annoyed. She'd always liked John's partner. I couldn't stop thinking about what John told me, Sarah said, glancing apologetically at Emily. About the list. So I went back to the precinct and pulled some files. John felt Emily's eyes on him, sharp and questioning. The secret was unraveling faster than he could contain it. What list? Emily asked, moving to stand beside John. Sarah looked between them, clearly realizing she'd stepped into personal territory. John, you haven't told her? Told me what? Emily's voice carried a warning edge that John knew all too well. He sank into his favorite armchair, suddenly feeling every one of his 67 years. Sit down. Please. As Emily perched on the edge of the couch, Sarah spread out copies of old case files. 3 weeks ago, right before John's retirement, someone left this in his desk drawer. She produced a photocopy of the list. 5 names, all victims from unsolved cases John worked over the years. Emily studied the list, her face growing pale. And John's name is at the bottom. In his own handwriting, Sarah confirmed grimly. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Emily looked at John as if seeing him for the first time, and he braced himself for anger, for accusations of keeping secrets. Instead, she surprised him. Well, she said, straightening her shoulders with characteristic determination. What are we going to do about it? Sarah smiled despite the gravity of the situation. I think I found something that might help. Look at this. She pulled out a manila folder thick with documents. I went through John's old cases, specifically the unsolved ones. Maria Santos, Tommy Martinez, Jennifer Walsh, David Kim, and Patricia Moore. All 5 victims on the list. John leaned forward. I remember all of them. Good people who deserved better than what they got. But here's what's interesting, Sarah continued. I found threatening letters in each of their case files. Letters that the families received after the murders, taunting them about the killer never being caught. She spread out photocopies of the letters, and John felt his blood run cold. The handwriting was different in each one, but there was something familiar about the tone, the phrasing. The original letters went missing from evidence years ago, Sarah said. But I found copies in the victims' families' files. And John, one of these letters was sent to you personally 3 years ago. John stared at her. That's impossible. I would remember. Check your desk, Sarah said quietly. The threatening letter file. Look for anything from 2020. With growing dread, John walked back to his study, Emily and Sarah following. He pulled open his filing cabinet, fingers trembling slightly as he located the threatening letters file. It was thicker than he remembered. And there, near the back, was an envelope addressed to him personally. The postmark was 3 years old, but the envelope had never been opened. How did I miss this? He muttered, staring at his own name written in block letters. Because, Sarah said softly, someone wanted you to find it now. Someone's been planning this for a very long time. As John held the unopened envelope, Emily moved to the window and froze. John, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. There's someone standing across the street, watching our house. They all rushed to the window. Under the streetlight, a figure in a dark coat stood motionless, face obscured by shadow. The moment they appeared at the window, the figure turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness between houses. Emily's hand found John's, squeezing tight. John, I'm scared. But before anyone could respond, the soft thud of something hitting their front porch made them all freeze. Sarah drew her weapon, moving toward the door. Stay back, she whispered, peering through the peephole. After a moment, she holstered her gun and opened the door cautiously. On their doormat sat a pristine white envelope, John's name written across the front in the same block letters as the 3-year-old letter. Emily picked it up with shaking hands and held it out to John. I think, she said, her voice steady despite her fear, it's time we found out what this is all about. Emily's hands tremble as she extends the envelope toward John, her eyes searching his face for answers he doesn't have. The paper feels heavier than it should, weighted with implications that make his chest tight. When did this arrive? John asks, his detective instincts kicking in even as dread pools in his stomach. About an hour ago. No postmark, no return address. Emily's voice wavers. John, what's happening? You've been acting strange ever since your retirement party. And now this mysterious envelope appears. John tears open the seal with deliberate care, his years of evidence handling making the motion automatic. Inside, a single photograph falls onto their coffee table. It's a picture of John leaving the precinct on his last day, but someone has drawn a red circle around his face. On the back, in block letters, "Your time is up, detective." Jesus Christ. Sarah's voice comes from behind them. She'd let herself in through the back door, a habit from their partnership days. Her face goes pale as she sees the photograph. "John, we need to get Emily somewhere safe. Now." But John's already moving, his mind racing through possibilities. "The handwriting," he mutters, studying the letters. "I've seen this before. Sarah, remember the Gillespie case from '98? Sarah freezes. "Richard Gillespie? John, that bastard's been dead for 3 years. We went to his funeral. Did we see the body?" John's voice carries a chill that makes both women step back. "Or did we just see a closed casket and take the coroner's word for it?" The realization hits Sarah like a physical blow. Richard Gillespie had been their most elusive adversary, a man who'd slipped through legal loopholes and disappeared into the shadows for years. John had finally cornered him in a warehouse fire, but Gillespie had vanished in the chaos. When authorities found what they claimed were his remains, John had felt something was off, but the case was officially closed. "He was always playing the long game," John continues, his voice growing steadier as the pieces fall into place. "Remember how he used to say he'd make us pay for every arrest, every conviction we cost him?" Emily grabs John's arm. "You think this dead man is threatening you? This is insane. Honey, in my line of work, dead men have a way of coming back when you least expect them." John's phone buzzes. A known number. He answers on speaker. "Hello, Detective Kincaid." The voice is gravelly, older than John remembers, but unmistakably familiar. "Enjoying your retirement?" Sarah's gun is already in her hand, though she knows it's useless against a voice on the phone. "Gillespie. Detective Lee. Still playing watchdog, I see." Richard's laugh is cold, calculating. "You know, I've spent the last 3 years planning this moment. Watching your families, learning your routines, waiting for the perfect time to remind you both that some debts never get forgiven." John's mind flashes back to their last encounter. The warehouse had been filled with smoke, sirens wailing outside. Gillespie had cornered John between 2 burning support beams, his face twisted with rage. "You destroyed my life, Kincaid." Gillespie had screamed over the roar of flames. "My family, my business, everything I built. But I'm patient. I'll wait as long as it takes to return the favor." Then the beam had collapsed, and when the smoke cleared, John had assumed justice had finally caught up with Richard Gillespie. How wrong he'd been. "What do you want?" John's voice is steady, professional, but Emily can see his hands shaking. "What I've always wanted. To watch you lose everything you care about, piece by piece. Starting with that lovely wife of yours." Emily's face goes white. Sarah immediately moves to the window, scanning the street for any sign of surveillance. "You son of a bitch," John snarls. "If you touch her, you'll what? Arrest me? You're retired, remember? Just another old man with too many enemies and not enough protection." Gillespie's voice carries a smile. "But don't worry, I'm not going to hurt Emily. Not yet. First, I want you to understand what it feels like to be hunted by someone you can't catch." The line goes dead, leaving the 3 of them staring at each other in the suffocating silence of their living room. Sarah breaks the tension first. "We need to move Emily to a safe house. Then we track this bastard down and finish what should have ended 3 years ago." But as John reaches for his coat, a shadow passes by their front window. Then another. Emily points toward the kitchen, her voice barely a whisper. "John, there's someone in our backyard." The house is surrounded, and Richard Gillespie steps out of the darkness, very much alive, with a smile that promises John's worst nightmare is just beginning. The abandoned warehouse where Richard had demanded they meet felt like a tomb, its broken windows casting jagged shadows across the concrete floor. John's heart hammered against his ribs as he stepped through the rusted doorway, Sarah flanking him with her weapon drawn. 27 years on the force had prepared him for many things, but not this confronting a ghost from his past who had orchestrated his potential murder. Richard Gillespie emerged from the shadows, older now, scarred, but unmistakably the same man John had arrested 15 years ago for embezzlement and corruption. The man who had sworn vengeance as the courtroom doors closed behind him. "You always were punctual, Detective Kincaid." Richard's voice carried the same cold edge John remembered. "Though I suppose it's just John now, isn't it? The retired hero. Why the games, Richard? Why the list? Why make me think I was losing my mind?" John's voice remained steady, though his hands trembled slightly. Richard circled them like a predator, his eyes never leaving John's face. "Because I wanted you to feel what I felt. The confusion, the fear, the sense that everything you believed about yourself was crumbling. You destroyed my life, John. My career, my family, my reputation. All gone because of your righteous crusade." Sarah kept her weapon trained on Richard, but John could see her mind working, piecing together the final elements of the puzzle. "The handwriting on the list," she said suddenly. "You forged it, didn't you? Made it look like John wrote his own name." Richard's laugh was bitter. "Very good, Detective Lee. I spent 2 years in prison practicing John's handwriting, studying every report he'd ever filed. I wanted him to doubt his own sanity, to wonder if some part of him had snapped and created this twisted game. But there were real victims," John said, the weight of understanding crushing down on him. "The names above mine. Those people actually died." "Oh yes." Richard's smile was chilling. "All unsolved cases from your illustrious career, John. Cases where justice was never served. I simply arranged for their names to appear together. Made it look like a pattern. Made it look like you were next." The revelation hit John like a physical blow. His entire investigation, the sleepless nights, the fear he'd brought into Emily's life, all of it orchestrated by a man consumed with revenge. But as the truth settled over him, something else emerged. Not defeat, but a strange sense of clarity. "You know what the real tragedy is, Richard?" John stepped forward, his fear transforming into something stronger. "You had a chance to rebuild after prison, to make something meaningful of your life. Instead, you've spent 15 years consumed by hatred, and for what? To make an old man paranoid in his retirement." Sarah's phone buzzed, backup arriving, the culmination of the evidence they'd been gathering. Richard's face twisted with rage as he realized his elaborate revenge was crumbling around him. "This isn't over," Richard snarled, but the fight had gone out of him. The police sirens in the distance marked the end of his grand scheme. As Richard was led away in handcuffs, John felt something he hadn't experienced in months: peace. The mystery that had consumed him was solved, not through some brilliant deduction, but through the simple truth that the past couldn't be changed, only faced with courage and the support of those who mattered. 3 weeks later, John sat at his kitchen table, Emily's hand warm in his as they watched the sunset through their window. Sarah had been promoted to detective sergeant, her work on the case earning her the recognition she'd always deserved. The newspapers had covered Richard's arrest, finally putting to rest the questions about John's mental state that had begun circulating in the community. "Do you regret anything?" Emily asked softly, her eyes reflecting the golden light filtering through their curtains. John considered the question carefully. The investigation had revealed not just Richard's deception, but also the depth of love and loyalty surrounding him. Sarah's unwavering support, Emily's patient strength, the community's respect for his years of service. These were the real treasures his career had earned him. "No," he said finally. "Not the cases, not the arrests, not even this. Richard made his choices just like we all do. I choose to be grateful for you, for Sarah, for the chance to see that the work we did mattered, even when it came with a price." Emily squeezed his hand, and John realized that his greatest case hadn't been solving crimes or catching criminals. It had been learning to trust in the goodness of the people around him, and understanding that true justice wasn't just about punishment. It was about healing, forgiveness, and the courage to keep believing in tomorrow. The detective had indeed closed his last case, but in doing so, he'd opened the door to the rest of his life.